Alright, this is the introduction to my new long-term project, Acolyte. So this is going to be the first devlog. I'm not going to do these on a regular basis. I'm going to release these whenever I feel like I've accomplished enough in the project to release another one. So I'm going to go more in depth into this one than I have in the past. First, let me show you what I have. I'll go in interplay mode. So this is what I have here. I can fire attacks, I can move around, and there is that one there. That one there was is an issue that I don't understand just yet, and I'll get to that later. But right now, let's go over what this project is and what it can do, or what the plan is. So, the plan for this project is to have you exploring this world where every section of it is contained in a box. This box here, that you see right here, was the original size of the this section of the map, but it was just too small. So I'm expanding it out to this larger size, which I think is going to be better for each individual section of the map. However, I might still have rooms this size. This is not going to be set in a dungeon or entirely. The plan is to have different components of the environment serve as the walls. So say if this was on a beach, this side could be the coast, and that could be blocking your way, and this could be a rock outcropping, some trees here, and something else down here, maybe pile of rocks or something, I don't know. And as for if you want to walk with this way, if it's a sea, then maybe a boat there. So that's the idea is to have a sort of dungeon-like layout, but have the walls and barriers be more natural and something that could logically be placed in that environment. So I'm going to actually dive into the code this time, and just to show you what I've done. So the player controller is the first thing I wrote up. So the idea is to have multiple spells that you could create and craft and fire out. So as you collect the components for them. So I have an array, a game object array, that's going to be used for where I'm going to store all these different spells, and the actual spells that you're firing are going to be these here, spells 1, 2, 3, and 4, which corresponds to either they're going to be the arrow keys on the keyboard, or X, circle, triangle, square on a PlayStation controller, or ABXY on an Xbox controller. So my player has an animator, so I'm referencing that to get that. The transform, yeah. So the way I'm doing it, if I go back, so the player, you are not actually these 3D models, you are their the shadows underneath them. That is what is containing the scripts and everything else. Just to make things simpler, I'm using 2D physics here instead of 3D physics. So all that's there. The player is just a bit of art sitting on top of it. Its function is just to look good. So all physics is 2D right now, and for this foreseeable future. So when I'm referencing the player body, I'm referencing that the actual what you're actually viewing, but you're not. I'm referencing the character model, is what I'm trying to say. Then I'm getting the rigid body here. The projectile. So whenever you create a projectile, when you cast a spell, you're creating a projectile, and that's going to be referencing that. You come down here to a speed variable that tells you how fast you're moving, and here in the starts, getting the rigid body, setting that to the variable, as well as defining the spells. This section right here, this is going to be removed in the future, so that you can set the spells yourself by crafting them or assembling them from the components. The idea is to have 3 separate components to find the spell. So the 3 components are going to be something like the element of the spell, the direction of the spell, and some modifier. And so here's the movement controls. I originally started out with a transform.translate, but I switched that over to rigidbody.velocity. That was to correct or stop whenever the player collided with something, they would start shaking, and this is to fix that problem, and it worked. So basically, I'm just going to go through one of these, and because the rest are the same with various different inputs. But basically, it goes through, it gets the velocity, puts it in the correct takes a vector going in the correct direction and multiplies it by the speed, and that's your velocity, and that puts you in the right direction. It sets your player the animation speed to 1, and changes the player body's the character model's rotation to match the direction that you are going. This is simpler to me than actually rotating the actual player that you're doing. Then I'd have to account for other things, but this is the simplest way that I could figure to do it. And that it's the same for every other direction. This is for right, but the rest are the same. When you're not moving, I'm setting the animation speed to 0 so that you just stop. This is so I don't have to create an animation right away. It still looks good. Now I'm going to close this, not that one, this one. Alright, so now I've closed down the movement section. This here is all about the firing mechanics. So I'm just going to go over one because they're all the same. So when you press the fire button, fire 1 in this case, which I think which is click on, currently by default is set to the clicking the mouse. I'm going to set it to right on the keyboard. It is square on a PlayStation controller, and I think that actually lines up with that might line up with A on a Xbox controller. I may be wrong, but I think that's what it is. So what it is we go through and says, like, if the spell 1, which is the spell in this slot, if it's equal to, if it's not null, if there's actually a spell in there, then we're going to instantiate something. So we're instantiating the projectile. So we're instantiating wherever the object is, the spell, which is the projectile, at our position, and the identity rotation. So it is always reset. Whenever you reset the rotation to 0, this is the identity. So that's what I'm setting the rotation to. Then I'm getting the so the projectile component, this is the script, is not in the projectile because it's spawning an empty, and the projectile, actual projectile that's firing out, that's a child of it. So I'm getting a component from the child that is the projectile script, and I'm getting a method. So I'm getting the value called emitter, and I'm setting it to the player or whatever's firing it. This is so I can use this same code for for enemies besides the player, and it will know what is actually launching the attack, so it doesn't kill itself. And this is the same script for everything, same code for everything. So moving on to the projectile script, this is somewhat simple and somewhat complicated at the same time. So I'm getting a rigid body here. This is the projectile rigid body, so PRB, and another rigid body, SRB, the source rigid body, where it's coming from. I'm getting the box collider and defining the speed, or creating variables for speed, a delay, and an F delay, which stands for first delay. One of these is a bit redundant. So I'm getting the parent object, which is the empty object that it spawns with. And that is so I could change the rotation of the projectile using prefab variants. And so that when I spawn it, I can use the same code. I don't have to define a rotation. I can change that in the variants to point in whichever direction I want it to go. And here's the emitter that we saw before. This is what is firing it, and a bool for start, and I'll explain that in a second. So here, we're in the start method, we're setting the projectile rigid body. We're just setting it, and we're getting the components and setting them. The box collider setting it. The box collider we're setting to false, so it doesn't collide with us right away. And we are saying destroy this projectile, or destroy the parent of this projectile, which is the empty that is parented it, so it's going to destroy itself and all other projectiles after 3 seconds. This is so that the projectile going off into the void forever doesn't happen. They don't pile up and slow down my game. And then I'm going to set start to true. So this here is I'm preparing for an error here, so this is why this is here. I'm setting the SRB, the source rigid body, to the emitter's rigid body. Now I'm doing this here for a reason. So it's to make sure. Oh, yeah. I just noticed I didn't fix this, so it's constantly resetting. Let me refix that now. So this is so that this happens once, which is now it does. I didn't see that last time I looked at this, but so it's basically a delayed start method. And the reason for this is that the emitter, when you spawn in this projectile, the emitter isn't anything. It needs to, so I can't assign it. There's nothing in the emitter, so I can't assign it to the emitter's rigid body to SRB just yet. I need to wait for the player controller script to actually put itself into the emitter section. So I'm putting it here instead of the start method, which is called immediately, to kind of prevent a problem that I've run into in code before. I'm calling it a timing error, whereas the logic is sound. It's just steps aren't happening in the correct order. It's looking for something that happens like a nanosecond later, and it just can't find it and it throws an error. So this is to counteract that. Moving down here, so here we're setting this line of code here is preventing us from running into our own bullets. So it's taking the player's or the projectile's velocity, and setting it to the magnitude of the actual player's velocity, or wherever's firing it's the source's velocity, and adding it to the own projectile's velocity, so that when we move forward, we don't run into our own bullets as we're firing them. So it's always going to be moving just fast enough to get away from us. This was my ultimate solution to that problem. It does have the side effect of whenever I move, the bullets speed up. I'm going to deal with that for now. If I find that I need to change that, I will. If not, it might just be a feature. But yeah, this here is a bit of redundant. No, this one's not redundant. This is this F delay is saying wait a couple seconds before you enable the box glider. Because both of these objects have rigid bodies, they can move, push each other. They can push each other around a bit, and also they'll destroy each other. Because one is set to destroy on collision. So the idea here is to say we don't want to run into our bullets, so just having that turned off for a couple seconds so it can get time to get away from us and turning back on, that's fine. So that's my initial solution to this, and it works. Then I decrease the delay and that's the delay by however many ticks it's gone by. The reason this is added in is because if I set this this delay, so I want to set this delay as low as possible, so that if I'm right next to an enemy and firing, the bullet doesn't go through them. Which is, but if I set it that low, so it hits him right away, so as soon as it leaves my hitbox, it hits the enemy, then I run into the issue of it could go, then I can run over my own bullets. So it's firing, so this is what this prevents. This line here prevents. And then moving down here is a bit of redundant code. I'll keep it for later use, but it's doing basically the same thing, or trying to. It's saying that whatever it is on the collision, if what you're colliding with is the emitter for this amount of time, because I do want the possibility of having friendly fire and being able to damage yourself. So a delay is like a short amount of time after you fire it, you can't get hurt by it. So that's what this is doing. But I couldn't have that. This sort of became redundant as a solution. I'm going to keep it because it's useful. It could be useful later down the line. It's not causing any bugs. But again, once this happens, it's going to destroy itself if it hits anything after this delay is gone. Or specifically, if it hits itself at all. Hits anything at all, it's going to destroy itself. That's not the player after a certain amount of time. So that is the basics of this. So let me run this and make sure that one line didn't mess everything up. So yeah, it works fine. But the one thing that is weird to me, and this is just something that's going to change, but I'm just wondering why. This item right here, this is the basic spell. It is the parent to all these other prefabs that you saw me firing. It doesn't move because the projectile script is turned off. But as you've seen as I went through my code, the only thing that tells it to destroy itself is this projectile code when it collides with anything. But this code is not enabled. At most I would expect to be able to push this around because it has a box lighter and rigid body. But as you've seen, when I run into it, it destroys itself. And when I try to fire it, it destroys itself as well. So I'm not sure what's going on, why that piece of code is running, and it's only partially running when the script is disabled. Because if the script is disabled, it'll be moving in some direction. Because the values are not set to 0. You can see that right here. This speed is not set to 0. It's going to move if I turn this on. And I'll turn it on just so you can see it. Oh, no, it's going to throw an error. Oh, yeah. Nothing's emitting it, so it's not going to do anything. So I can't actually do that. That's the error I was expecting. But yeah. So it's not going to fire right now. With the projectile, the script turned off, it's not going to go anywhere. And it doesn't destroy itself after a time. But it still reacts to the collision and destroys itself. And this is, I don't understand why that one particular line of the script is running. And that might pose a problem later on down the line. I'm not sure. If anyone has any answers to that weird issue or whatever, put it in the comments. This has been the first devlog of Acolyte. I'm going to try and not get so deep into the weeds next time, but I'll show you what I have, and I'll just until next time. This is the end of the devlog.